Hey y'all, it's Josh Kasoff. I wanted to introduce our new series, entitled What's in a Name, where we'll be looking at different cannabis strains with very, very interesting names and wondering why they have those names. For our first episode, because the subjects of race and social justice within cannabis are so relevant, I wanted our first episode to be about someone who was instrumental in cannabis's federal prohibition, yet someone whose name is now being used for some badass cannabis strains. For decades before recreational legalization, cannabis use was always associated with the growing racism against Mexican immigrants and the black communities across America in the 1930s. Cannabis became known as something that only supposedly violent Mexican immigrants or degenerate jazz musicians would smoke, and the plant even got titles such as the Assassin of Youth, a weed with roots in hell, and who can forget the absolute classic of Reefer Madness. But the wildly untrue yet far-spread racism surrounding cannabis that still exists today, along with the federally illegal status, was mainly started by one horribly brutal bureaucrat, a man so notorious for his inhumane, tough-on-crime stances across his decades in law enforcement that it's inspired not only the clusterfuck that is the war on drugs, but also other horrific human rights abusers that still operate today. This man was Harry Anslinger. In 1930, alcohol prohibition was almost over. It was a proven failure, and America was ready to get hammered again. At only 38 years old, commissioner of the newly formed Federal Bureau of Narcotics, Harry J. Anslinger needed a new substance to demonize. Originally, Anslinger didn't see cannabis as a big deal or something that would cause violence. In a 1933 Journal of Criminal Law and Criminology entry, Anslinger even said it's an absurd fallacy that cannabis causes violent behavior. However, at risk of losing a job unless they went after another intoxicant, Anslinger quickly went against cannabis, which he gave the completely made-up term of marijuana to associate with Mexican immigrants. He partnered with his buddies, publisher and prohibitionist William Randolph Hearst, as well as the DuPont Corporation, to start spreading racist nonsense about cannabis, completely ignoring evidence that supports the contrary. Hearst and DuPont mainly went against cannabis because of hemp's production potentials, however. They saw its many uses as competition against their respective fields of paper and plastic, much to the opposition of fellow industrial tycoon Henry Ford. And although Mr. Ford probably wouldn't be too happy that I myself am reporting on him, he famously built an entire automobile out of hemp, so he was quite a proponent for the crop. Over the next 4 years, Anslinger and company spread so much propaganda that it helped with the passing of the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937, which led to cannabis's federally illegal status. His inhumane look at drug addiction and how to treat nonviolent users led to this country that certain people still somehow refer to as the land of the free, having the largest prison population on Earth by a mile. And Anslinger was a disgustingly open bigot when it came to the true victims of cannabis's prohibition. He said that marijuana makes black men think they're as good as white men. However, you can see he used a far worse term than black men. Many of the quotes you're now viewing are directly contributed to Anslinger and his very shockingly racist nature. And his infamous 100,000 marijuana smokers quote is even more racist. Because I genuinely don't feel comfortable reading this, I'll let you read this one to yourself. He led the Federal Bureau of Narcotics for 32 years in total, before dying unremarkably in 1975. Objectively, he was an awful human being who unfairly targeted and terrorized high-profile and outspoken people of color, such as Billie Holiday, for singing her famous anti-lynching song, Strange Fruit, in front of an all-white crowd in New York City. His sad legacy should only be remembered as a racist and xenophobic one that directly destroyed countless lives through his cruel and unusual policies. But with recreational cannabis legalization happening in Nevada in July of 2017, some cultivators with a great sense of humor have turned his infamous name into some top-notch strains. Because we wanted to hear more about the strain itself and how cultivators are carrying on Anslinger's legacy in a way that would make his head explode, Randy OG and I had the pleasure of getting a tour of the cultivation facility of Eightfold, Nevada, the premier cultivators of such popular strains as Starkiller, Inferno OG, and the strain of the day, Anslinger. In particular, we had the honor of speaking with Ryan Laughlin, General Manager of Cultivation with Eightfold and Nevada Organic Remedies.
So Anslinger is one of our personal favorites. It's been with the Eightfold brand since the beginning. It's one of our original staples. Our regional general manager, Brandon Weingott, he raves about it. He loves the story. He was instrumental in getting it brought onto the team because he loved the fact that it was kind of a in-your-face, the old Mr. Harry Anslinger himself. He loved the irony of it, and at the end of the day, it's one of the best strains I've ever grown, hands down. If you just had to ask me point blank, hey Ryan, I need to grow some really good weed at a great rate, high yield, good THC, all this stuff, Anslinger checks all those. So coincidentally, it's one of the best strains we've ever grown, and it's kind of, hey, take that, buddy.
While there, Randy OG and I got the tour of a lifetime, where we got to view nearly every room of the facility, from their many expansive flower, veg, and clone rooms showcasing all their popular strains, to the processing and extraction stations, and we even got to hang out with the trimming team and had the opportunity to see Anslinger being trimmed and perfected for store shelves. The buds themselves have firm and thick nug structure, similar to famous hybrid strains such as Gorilla Glue, and are very, very dense and well-defined. The plants themselves are breathtaking too, showing the very best properties of the strain in the process. And true to its reputation, Anslinger is undeniably a smash hit for cannabis consumers in Las Vegas.
It has great reviews. We have, it's one of our, like I said before, it's one of our staples. We have a lot of return customers that come specifically for Anslinger. And the flower, she's a well-blended hybrid. Really is not overwhelming, but it's enough to get you high if you are one of those old school classic heads that's looking for a heavy hit, but it's also not too much to where it's gonna ruin the rest of your day.
And although consumers aren't commenting on how ironically the strain is named, Laughlin believes that's actually a very good thing.
And like we were kind of discussing earlier, that's almost the ironic part about it is everybody knows Anslinger as a cannabis strain now, which is making him roll over in his grave, I would imagine.
Yeah, he must be madder than hell.
But to your answer your question, no, nobody really does know about it, but that's almost the fun part about it is everybody thinks of Anslinger as a cannabis strain now.
To conclude, Laughlin believes it's best that the Anslinger name only be remembered as a quality cannabis strain. Furthermore, he believes in the tradition that the best way to remember similar historical prohibitionists is to name future cannabis strains after them, such as former Attorney General and Keebler Elf Jeff Sessions, who received his cannabis strain honor on 4/20 of 2018, when a much younger and far more pro-government cannabis journalist wrote an article for Cannabis Magazine about the limited time only strain out of Denver called Jeff Sessions.
The winners write history, and at the end of the day, we're gonna win this. We were on the right side of it from the beginning. He was on the wrong side of it. He tried to use every bit of influence and power he could to manipulate the system in his favor and in the favor of his friends. And at the end of the day, like I said, that name is going to go down as a great cannabis strain. And that's all I want to ever hear anybody ever talk about it is. So that's kind of just a big F you back to all those guys is this is what we're doing it for. And that's why we're the winners in this battle and we're writing history that we want.